Chapter 27. It was sometime after Zhikolov embarked upon his quest to Korriban that General Grievous was called up to the bridge. He honestly didn't know why his droids required his presence. His fleet's whereabouts continued to elude the Republic and the Jedi. As far as he knew, there wasn't an emergency in progress. So why did they need him? Grievous couldn't help but roll his eyes. His droids were more incompetent than he realized. He casually stalked out of the turbolift once it reached the bridge and went directly to where his droid captain was waiting for him. The moment the sound of his loud, clanking feet filled the still air, the entire mechanical crew paused in their tasks to look at him in silent wonderment. "What is it, Captain?" Grievous narrowed his reptilian eyes. This had better be important. "Sir, Lord Dooku commands that you contact him at once." The droid deadpanned in a robotic voice devoid of emotion. So that's what was so urgent? Why didn't the Count contact him directly? He growled and shoved the droid aside and went to the comm station. General Grievous established a clear transmission with his master a few short seconds later. Once the elderly man appeared, the general of the droid armies bowed respectfully. "My lord, Dooku, how may I serve you?" Grievous loathed being so sickeningly polite to the old man all the time, but he knew to do otherwise would cost him greatly. "Has Zhikolov departed for his mission?" "Yes." "Very good. General Grievous, I require your presence immediately. Meet me at my abode. There are some concerns that need to be addressed." "Concerns? What concerns?" Grievous had to squander the overwhelming desire to immediately vocalize his internalized thoughts. The cyborg Kalish had a feeling it had something to do with his son. He grudgingly shoved the questions he had to the back of his mind. There would come a time when he would have those questions answered, but now wasn't it? He averted his eyes and bowed submissively. "As you wish, my lord." He waited for the man to cut their transmission and then went to sit down heavily in his command chair. Why did the Count require he go to his secret abode in person? It did strike the Kalish warlord as odd that Dooku refused to transmit his message over a secure comm channel. Whatever it was that the old man was hiding, must be critically important. The general of the droid armies was getting sick and tired of all of the secrecy that surrounded the Sith. He still had yet to discover the mystery surrounding Zhikolov's escape from the Jedi. His son had of course been rescued, but the rescuer remained nameless. That bounty hunter, Cad Bane, was instructed by a mystery employer to make him believe that his son had perished at the hands of the clones, but why? It still unnerved Grievous that the mystery continued to remain unsolved. It seemed that someone at the time didn't want him to interfere with his son's affairs. Chances were that Zhikolov had been rescued by the mystery employer. After which, he was most likely provided with the chance to slay Anakin Skywalker's Padawan. Perhaps the mysterious rescuer orchestrated Zhikolov's duel. Had that been a trap? To kill his son? Was that the reason why Cad Bane contacted him to tell him that his son had been killed? General Grievous growled angrily and resisted the urge to break something at the mere thought. "Set a course for the moon of Holma with all haste," Grievous ordered while pointing a metal digit towards the viewport. The invisible hand turned gradually to the starboard side as the course was laid in. Once they were at light speed, Grievous got up from his command chair. "Captain, alert me when we have arrived at our destination." Grievous narrowed his pupils into slits as he shot the droid a glare through his mask. "Yes, my lord," the droid responded in an emotionless monotone. General Grievous returned to his private quarters. There he found Senti 7. His son had not been allowed to take the faithful droid along with him, so the droid had been left in his father's care. Currently Senti 7 was shut down in a recharge cycle. Grievous went over to the desk and computer terminal he rarely used and logged on. He had some research to do. Anakin Skywalker yawned and stretched stiff muscles. He'd been researching 9 hours straight in the Hall of Records. So far, all he could glean regarding Zhikolov's home planet was sketchy at best. There was one record pertaining to something called the Huck War, but much of that file had been missing. Come to think of it, most of the records were either deleted, omitted, or missing. He was able to access a small history report submitted to the Jedi Council by an unnamed Jedi. According to that particular record, the Jedi Council had received a plea from the Hux to aid them. To what extent, the young Jedi didn't know. That file was incomplete. In addition, a second report had been submitted that was dated a few short calendar months after the first. It contained partial information, some of which referred to the Jedi Council's decision to aid the Hux. 3 Jedi were dispatched to the planet. Anakin found a field report from one of the Jedi that contained vital intelligence concerning the Kaleesh warriors and their part in the war. The majority of that file was lost as well. Anakin swore beneath his breath. Maybe Zikaloff was right, maybe the Jedi were hiding something. Why else would all of these records be missing or incomplete? The young man was not a part of the Jedi Council, but even he knew that the Council were prone to keep their secrets. His master Obi-Wan might even know a few, but in the past whenever Anakin would question him about it, the elder Jedi would kindly turn him down and deny all knowledge. Obi-Wan even laughed once when Anakin dared to concoct a wild conspiracy theory against the Council when he'd been younger. He believed at the time that the Jedi kidnapped random children that were not Force-sensitive to train at the temple, and that the reason for that was to turn them into secret assassins whose sole mission was to kill separatist politicians. Anakin Skywalker returned the records from where he'd gotten them from and checked out of the hall. He went directly to his private chambers. There was much he needed to meditate on. The history revolving around young Zikaloff and the Kaleesh race remained buried beneath the sands of time. It was a history that Anakin vowed would one day see the light of day. The young Jedi was on a quest for truth, and he knew he would find and expose it, but at what cost? The invisible hand dropped out of light speed and began a constant, steady orbit around the moon of Holma. General Grievous boarded his personal fighter craft and flew with haste. He landed near one of the entrances to Dooku's fortress and clambered out. His velvety cape trailed after him as he stalked towards the large doorway, all the while wondering what this secretive meeting was all about. He met the man in his large office that also served as a throne room of sorts, and the Count cut right to the chase. "General Grievous. There is much we need to discuss, please, have a seat." Both the human and cyborg Kaleesh took seats across from each other, and the general remained absolutely silent. "Your son is being hunted." General Grievous's golden eyes widened in shock. He refrained from any sudden outburst, however, and allowed the man to continue. "The Jedi have deemed the boy to be far too dangerous to be kept alive. They have ordered his termination and have posted a bounty that warrants his death. That is not the only reason why I have summoned you here." General Grievous eyed Dooku suspiciously and leaned forward minutely as he listened intently. "There was more? My master was the one who orchestrated your son's rescue from the Jedi. It was my master that also gave your son the opportunity in which to slay Anakin Skywalker's Padawan." The Kaleesh cyborg nodded. "So that explained one of his theories. My master, Lord Sidious, believes it will be in the boy's best interest to rejoin you and your fleet upon the completion of his training. His powers are growing, and it won't be long now until he can unleash his full potential upon our sworn enemies." "When will my son return to me?" Grievous questioned hopefully. "In due time. Depending on his skill and aptitude, I believe the boy will be ready to take part in the war within the next couple of years. General, you will do well to remember that above all else, the chain of command will continue as it has been. Zikaloff will still report directly to me. When the time comes, he will be considered your equal." "Yes, my lord." While it may have insulted some, General Grievous was proud that his son would fight right beside him. He thought highly of Zikaloff and felt that the boy had earned that honor. The cyborg Kaleesh was still a bit wary, however. There was always the dark possibility that the Count and his Sith Master might use Zikaloff to overthrow General Grievous and take his place. That would be foolish, given the great amount of effort and trouble to mold the Kaleesh warlord into his role as general to begin with. Would his masters really want to dispose of him that quickly? There was much to consider. "General, I want you to hold your fleet 2 parsecs shy of Korriban. Send your top surveillance droids to monitor his activity. While the boy is becoming powerful, we cannot afford to lose such an asset. He must not be destroyed before he can complete his training. Kill anyone who may try to interfere with his mission. I'm counting on you, General. Although I have a feeling you won't disappoint me, Count Dooku half smiled. General Grievous nodded silently. He knew the Count was trying to bait him into revealing his true feelings for his son. He ignored the man's words and recognized them for what they were. Orders. Nothing more, nothing less. It will be done, my lord. The general of the droid armies stood and bowed respectfully. As he left the moon of Hulma behind him, he silently mulled over the information that had just been revealed. The Kaleesh cyborg knew his son was quite capable of handling himself, but the father in him couldn't help but feel a small pang of worry. He ordered his crew to set the coordinates in the Navi computer that Dooku provided and went to his quarters once they were at lightspeed. He sat on the bed he never used and pulled out a handheld holo projector. The image of a 6-year-old Zekalov appeared. Grievous watched the small video silently and felt, well, nostalgic hardly fit the word. The video brought back a fond memory, and if Grievous could smile, he would have in that moment. It was sometime after he was forced to take his son to see Dooku for the first time. They were visiting the remote planet of Aradonis. It was more of a moon, really. They were there to collect supply crates full of food for the organic crew of Grievous's ship, as well as engineering specs for the new ship Malevolence. A new weapon was going to be constructed on the new ship, but they had yet to pick up the technical and maintenance crews responsible for the project, who were a few parsecs away. His son was exploring the small garden in the courtyard of the royal family, who were so graciously aiding the separatists in their crusade. The little Kaleesh boy bent down into a running fountain and picked up a beautiful, shimmering, purple shell and ran excitedly over to his father. "Look, father. Look at what I found." Grievous bent down to get a better look. "What have you got there?" "I don't know." The boy furrowed a brow. He'd never seen a shell before. Callie had plenty on the coastline, but the Kaleesh child wouldn't have the opportunity to see those while he was traveling across the galaxy with his father. Zekalov. The general was abruptly cut off by his son's next exclamation. "But I want you to have it 'cause it's pretty." His son raised the shell up for his father to take. He told his son to put it back where he found it, since it didn't belong to him. The boy had been heartbroken at first, but he soon forgot about it once he caught sight of something else that intrigued his interest. The video ended there, but Grievous remembered the rest. The cyborg Kaleesh reached into the folds of his cloak and took out the one object that had never left his pocket since that day. He handled the object with great care and gingerly turned it over in his hands. A glimmering purple shell glinted beneath the overhead lighting of the ship, the beautiful color bringing with it all the love a son could have for his father. Where was he? Zekalov walked through the ruins of an ancient civilization long destroyed. He was being drawn in the direction of what had to be a tomb. The dark side was powerful in this place. A Sith Lord must have been buried here thousands of years ago. He stopped walking once he crossed the threshold of the doorway. A gust of wind blew bits of dust in his face, and he felt a chill creeping down his spine. He squinted his eyes and thought he saw a ghostly form, from far away, standing directly ahead of him in the hallway. A deep, dark, disembodied voice echoed all around him then. Go back from whence you came. For here, only death remains." Zekalov jerked awake from the vivid dream once his ship's sensors alerted him that the dark shadow was dropping out of hyperspace. He switched off the autopilot and resumed manual control. The streaking star line disappeared and a red planet loomed before him. Korriban. The young Kaleesh warrior used the ship's sensors to locate the valley his master spoke of and found a suitable landing site. He made sure his gear was well secured and triggered the button to open the landing ramp. It lowered with a hiss of steam. Zekalov was already halfway down before it even reached the ground. He took a look around and scouted the perimeter to ensure that the area was safe. Once he was satisfied that the coast was clear, He made sure the landing ramp was raised and that the ship was secured, and then he truly began his journey. The young Kalish warrior figured it would probably be wise to construct his new lightsaber before venturing into the Sith tombs. Especially after that dream he had on the way to the surface of the planet. Zikalof ran swiftly up a rocky slope that overlooked the valley. The young man pulled out his viewfinder and spotted what he thought was an entrance to a cave. He zoomed in and magnified the lenses to verify his findings. It looked like it. But there was really only one way to be certain. Zikalof began his treacherous climb down from the jagged cliffside. A rock gave way beneath one of his hands and he fell a few feet before catching himself again. That had been close, too close. It wasn't long until the strong lad reached the valley floor. He used his compass to locate the cave. It took him 3 hours to reach it. By the time he got there, he was drenched in sweat and dying of thirst. He emptied his canteen and lay panting on a patch of dry grass near the shaded entrance. This planet was far too hot for his liking. Now all he had to do was go inside the cave and find a lightsaber crystal. His master told him that in essence, the lightsaber crystal would choose him. Whatever that meant. Dooku's warning that the journey would be perilous reverberated in Zikalof's mind. What would he find in these caves? He peered into the entrance to see that it was pitch dark. The idea to use a torch was quickly thrown out of the proverbial window when the thought arose that there might be something incredibly dangerous in there, maybe even alive. The last thing he wanted was to attract unwanted attention to himself and become a creature's next meal. The young warrior opted to keep both hands free in order to use his weapons. Might as well get this over with. Here goes nothing. Zikalof took a deep breath and released it and then entered the deepening dark of the crystal caves. Zikalof's keen Kalish eyes could see virtually well in the dark, but this was a kind of darkness he'd never encountered before. He would just have to rely on the Force to see his way through. It was much cooler in the cave and rather damp. He used a hand to feel his way through one earthy tunnel after another. He went right, then straight, then left, then right again. This was such an immense place. It must stretch on for at least a mile. It would be a miracle if he ever found his way out again. Then he heard it. A skittering noise. He stretched out with the Force to try to locate it and frowned. There was something alive down here. A large creature. Zikalof had a feeling that there wasn't just one. He unsheathed his twin swords. He pressed his back flat against one tunnel wall when one of the creatures skittered around a corner and went the opposite way from where he was standing. He was in the process of exhaling a sigh of relief when another leapt at him from around the corner and screeched loudly in his face. Zikalof screamed and fought the monstrosity. Luckily for him, they were pretty easy to kill. They sort of reminded him of Akle's. The dying shrieks of the one he had just slain drew quite a crowd, and soon Zikalof was in danger of being overcome. He sensed a mob of them coming down the corridor he was in. Well, screw this. He ran. He ran the fastest he'd ever gone in his life. It was a miracle he didn't run into a wall or trip over anything. His legs carried him into a cavern, only this one was filled with a soft glowing light. Zikalof stood for a moment and marveled at the beauty of it all. There were crystals of many shapes, sizes, and colors. He was quickly snapped back to reality when 4 of the creatures skittered into the crystal cavern with him. The Kalish warrior succeeded in slaying them and only walked away with a few scratches and a couple of bruises from where their legs had hit him during the fight. Thank the stars he had lightning-fast reflexes. He also had the Force, which gave him an even greater advantage. He did have to use an anti-venom shot once he discovered that the pincers at the ends of their legs had the potential to poison him. He was more than relieved when they were finally dead. He took a look around and noticed egg-shaped things nestled between crystal clusters and studied them more closely. He suddenly realized he was standing in the middle of a nest. So that's why they attacked him. Bantha shit. I need to get out of here before more of those things come. Okay, crystal, where is my crystal? The crystal would choose him. Really? He scanned the room, searching for anything that might give him a clue as to which one to take. The loud cries of more creatures echoed down the tunnels. More of them were coming. Zikolov made his choice. I can figure out which one is mine later. He quickly and efficiently collected one of each crystal in the room and put them in the small satchel he had in his pack and then made a mad dash for it. He tried his hardest to remember his way out and got turned around a few times. Then he saw a light at the end of the tunnel he was in. He ran for all he was worth. Once he made it back into the merciless heat and blinding light of the sun, he all but dove out into the scorching sand. He whooped for joy and laughed. He was out. He was free. And he had lightsaber crystals galore. Zikolov was tempted to do a victory dance and gloat at the mouth of the cave that the beasts hadn't defeated him, but decided not to press his luck. The young warrior traveled back to his ship. Water was scarce on this planet, although he thought he spotted an outpost a few clicks south of where he had landed. He knew he was to avoid going to such a place. His mission did not entail socializing with any locals. Besides, Zikolov had a water filtration synthesizer on his ship. He built it himself. Once he activated it, he could have his canteen filled to the brim in less than an hour. The Kalish teen decided that he would begin the construction on his new lightsaber while he waited for his water to synthesize. The 3-hour trip back to the Dark Shadow seemed to take longer than his trip to the cave. He all but cried with relief when he finally made it back. The boy collapsed on the floor of the interior cabin of his ship once the landing ramp closed behind him. He savored the air conditioning and couldn't imagine living on this world. He didn't envy the people that may still be keeping the outpost installation running. Zikolov couldn't wait to leave this planet far behind him. The young Sith apprentice rummaged through his lightsaber construction materials and set them all on the floor along with every lightsaber crystal he'd harvested from the caves and sat down cross-legged. He furrowed his brows in thought. He didn't notice anything abnormal about the crystals. There wasn't even the slightest clue as to which he was destined for. The boy scratched his head in puzzlement. Did he miss something in that cave? What if none of these were meant for him? He reached a hand out to touch a blue crystal and it immediately brightened. He withdrew his hand and it returned to its previous original glow. He reached for a green, yellow, purple, and red crystal and they all responded the same way the blue one did. By the Force, are all of these choosing me? Well, if they were, he could make multiple lightsabers. The only problem with that was the simple fact that Dooku instruct he only build one. So Zikolov had quite a choice to make. Of course most Sith preferred the red lightsabers. Typical. The Kalish teen yearned for some form of individuality. So he immediately ruled out the red one. Okay, let's see, Kenobi and Skywalker use blue lightsabers. Do I really want one like theirs? His silent pondering screeched to an immediate halt when he sensed a disturbance in the Force. He felt a powerful pull, almost as if someone wanted to guide him somewhere. Zikolov felt the greatest need to leave the ship and follow the silent beckoning. Yeah, right. Everyone knows what happens when some stupid fool goes off by themselves to explore something dark and mysterious. The Kalish teen shuddered and then chided himself. He wasn't sure what he should do now. He was eventually supposed to find his way to the tomb of the Sith Lord Razor. Zikolov sighed and rubbed his prosthetic hand over his scaly face. This was turning out to be quite a day. Yet again the strong allure to follow the mysterious Force call overwhelmed him. His lightsaber could wait. He saw a canyon about a couple of miles away from where he found the cave. It had 2 large statues of what he assumed were Sith. That might be where he was meant to go. Zikolov waited 20 minutes and then refilled his canteen once it was finished synthesizing and ventured out again. He drank his water sparingly and when he finally made it to the base of the canyon he stared up at the statues in wonderment. He surveyed his surroundings and discovered evidence that there had once been a paved road. There were minor artifacts laying half buried in the sand such as ancient pots and pieces of corroded metal armor. He even found an ancient spear that had been snapped in half. Apparently a battle took place here at some point. Zikolov continued on his way and the ravine opened up. The Kalish teen shielded his eyes from the blazing sun, and once his eyes finally refocused, he gasped in awe. There were 6 large tombs, 3 on the left side of the valley and 3 on the other. There were pillars strewn about the place, some still standing while others were completely shattered. He took a few steps forward when he felt the force call once again. He began walking towards a tomb to the left. The one in the middle of the 3. He stood in the threshold of the doorway and felt a powerful surge in the dark side. Zikalov had the strongest feeling he wasn't alone. "Hello? Anyone home?" Zikalov snorted. Of course there was. The person in question was simply dead. Unless there were grave robbers. He highly doubted that though. This place was long deserted, and from the look of things, if there was anything valuable to be looted, it had been already. At this point the young Kalish was feeling pretty jumpy. His father did tell him that spirits existed when he had been younger, and even his master Darth Tyrannus mentioned force ghosts. It had him freaked out right now. Especially when the tomb entrance behind him shut on its own. "Hey! What's the meaning of this?" Zikalov pounded a fist uselessly against the stone wall blocking his only escape. "I told you to turn back. Now you will die, and this tomb shall become your new home." That dark, disembodied voice returned. "I'm not afraid," Zikalov shouted with a snarl as he unsheathed his twin blades. He held them at the ready as he slowly and cautiously made his way down the stone-hewn hallway. To his utter astonishment, the torches on the wall spontaneously blazed to life and lit up the path he was meant to take. It was strange. This ghostly entity warned him to turn back, told him he would die, and now was leading him, where? To his death. He took one step and heard as well as sensed a booby trap and dropped flat on his stomach as crossbolts fired through the air where he had been standing and embedded deeply in the stone behind him. Phew, that was close. He carefully stood back up and crouched. He picked up a rock that was sitting next to him and hurled it a few feet in front of him. A trapdoor opened and would have plunged Zikalov down on some sharply pointed spikes. The young warrior knew that his force capabilities would play a key role in helping him survive this mission, but he also knew that he needed to play it smart. "I don't know who you are or why you want to kill me, but I'm coming for you," Zikalov shouted. His voice echoed down the expanse of the tomb. The hallway branched off. He could go to the left, the right, or straight ahead through double doors. He noticed that the middle doors had 2 locks, which meant that now he had to find 2 keys. So which way, right or left? Damn. Choices, so many choices. He stood for a good 3 minutes in silent deliberation. He felt the force pulling him towards the door on the right. He closed his eyes and offered up a quick prayer and entered. Zikalov kept to the shadows and swore to himself when he saw that there were 2 other occupants in the room. 2 young rancors. How did he not sense those? It must be the tomb itself. The dark side was strong in this place. Zikalov sheathed his swords and pulled his Zika Arms Outland rifle from where it had been slung over his back and aimed it at one of the rancors that was bent over eating something. He shuddered at the thought of what it might be. He aimed down the length of the barrel and squeezed off one shot. It hit the rancor in the eye and dropped it dead. The second one charged him with a furious roar. Zikalov tossed his rifle aside and unsheathed his swords again. Apparently the younger the rancor, the faster it ran. He somersaulted over the beast and turned to force push it into a wall. It didn't have the desired effect. The monstrosity seemed to have some sort of immunity to force attacks. The rancor knocked him down and moved in to take a bite at his leg. Zikalov slashed his sword and wounded the beast. The rancor roared in pain and charged him again. The young Kalish screamed his battle cry and charged the monster as well and threw his blade end over end. He used a force push on the blade to give it extra momentum into the chest of the creature while he slid beneath the rancor's legs and to the other side. His strategy prevailed. His blade pierced the rancor's heart. The boy picked himself up off of the floor and dusted off his clothes. He retrieved his weapons and returned them to their respective places on his back. He went to inspect the pile of chewed bones and other odd things, many of which he had no desire to identify, and found a key. Great. One down and one to go. He released a long-suffering sigh and trudged out of the room and stood before the secondary door on the left of the main double doors. If he could handle 2 young rancors on his own, unaided, without the use of a lightsaber, and win, how hard could the next challenge be? Once the second set of doors opened, Zikalov's jaw dropped and he stared in utter shock. His throat constricted and his mouth suddenly felt dry as he lost the ability to speak. "Hello, young Zikalov. I've been waiting for you." The familiar figure spoke. "This isn't possible. You can't be real." The Sith apprentice took a step back in complete denial. "I'm as real as you will ever be. Now prove your worth or die trying." A yellow lightsaber was activated and the tall, cloaked figure prepared to engage the young Kalish teen. Zikalov could only stare dumbly into the face of himself. Chapter 28. Zikalov could only stare in stupefied amazement as the shadowy figure stepped into the light. His opponent standing in front of him was... well, he wasn't entirely sure. The Kalish was older, but claimed to be him. The elder Kalish pulled his hood back and pulled off his war mask to reveal his face. When his challenger made no move to attack him, the young warrior finally found his voice. "Who are you?" He narrowed doubtful eyes on him. "I am you. 12 years hence." "What?" the young Kalish questioned with complete suspicion and distrust. This was supposed to be a future, 25-year-old version of himself? By the Force. His future self radiated great power and strength. What baffled young Zikalov the most was that this adult version of himself wasn't completely submerged in the dark side. The young apprentice could sense through the Force that the elder Zikalov was not a Jedi either. He seemed to be in between. Strange. "I don't understand. Why aren't you a Sith Lord? You should have been by now," Zikalov scoffed at the impostor. "There are many things about the Force that you do not yet know. You were forced into apprenticeship by the Sith and never had the chance to choose your own path." "That's funny. You know, the last Jedi I killed said something along those lines," Zikalov growled with narrowed golden eyes. He unsheathed the swords from his back holsters and raised them up defensively. "Ah, yes. Padawan Ahsoka Tano. If I'm not mistaken, she is the only Jedi you've killed. How many more do you intend to slay?" "All of them." Zikalov growled as his anger began to burn within him. His grip on his swords tightened marginally. "Why?" The elder Kalish cocked his head in curious wonderment. "You of all people should know the answer to that." The young warrior angrily hissed as he twirled one sword in eager anticipation of the looming fight. "Killing the Jedi will not change the past. What do you have to gain from accomplishing such a feat?" Young Zikalov paused to consider the odd question. "Justice. Define justice." The young Kalish teen stood silently for a moment with a deep frown. The definition of such a word was irrelevant. "You know, you are sounding more and more like a damn Jedi." Zikalov growled with loathing. "Do you see this?" The elder Kalish held up a key. It was the second key to unlock the main doors to the tomb. Zikalov's rage simmered down and he took a step forward with an upturned palm, half expecting his elder self to simply hand it to him. Adult Zikalov smirked with some amusement and stuffed it within the folds of his tunic with a small shake of his head. "This key is special. It cannot be given. It must be earned. It is here that you will either pass your final test, or join Sith Lord Razor in eternal rest within his tomb." Without any warning, the large stone door behind Zikalov shut seemingly on its own, trapping him in the room with the apparition of his future self. "If you did that to ensure I wouldn't run, it was pointless." Young Zikalov got into a fighting stance. "I know. That was not the reason. I could not allow any outside interference. This test is not meant for prying eyes." Young Zikalov dropped his guard for a brief moment to give the elder Kalish a quizzical look. It appeared as if the elder warrior had heard his unspoken question. "Should you pass this test, you will discover the answer for yourself. Now prove your worth." The adult Kalish twirled his yellow lightsaber with a dazzling flash and clashed blades with Zekalov. They fought with raw ferocity. Young Zekalov used the dark side to fuel his attacks. His elder version simply parried and blocked. The apparition did not draw upon the Force like his younger counterpart. Ageless wisdom gleamed within his golden reptilian eyes, and he continued to bob and weave in a deadly dance with his smaller opponent. The 13-year-old Force pushed his foe across the room and twirled his father's twin blades. Before he could lunge forward for another attack, his adversary did the unthinkable. The elder Kalish deactivated his yellow lightsaber and tossed it aside. "I will no longer fight you, Zekalov." "What are you doing?" "This test was not meant to prove your power or skill as a warrior or a Sith." "What are you talking about?" Zekalov shouted with disbelief. "What you do next will determine your future, young one. You must kill me to claim your prize." Young Zekalov was stunned into prolonged silence as he regarded his elder self. "This is a trick. It has to be. Pick up your lightsaber and fight me. There is no further reason to fight. Your Sith master sent you to this dark place to face your Sith trials. Strike me down now and the key is yours." Young Zekalov was torn between duty and his innate sense of honor. He knew that as a Sith he was not to hesitate. He felt as conflicted as he had been as a child. Since the day Dooku forced him to execute a helpless, unarmed, Republic prisoner, he swore to never kill, unless in battle or if it was for a just cause. His father and Dooku both punished him before in the past for granting his opponents any mercy. Mercy was for the weak. That was what he had been taught. That was the way of a Sith. The warrior teen made his decision, keeping in mind the future consequences of what his actions would provoke. Zekalov summoned the hatred within him to give him the strength to do what needed to be done. He looked his elder self directly in the eyes when he spoke. "I'm sorry it had to come to this." He raised his twin swords and threw first one and then the other in rapid succession towards the immobile Kalish. He watched them fly, end over end, his grim expression reflected in the eyes of his elder self. In a matter of seconds, it was all over. Clank, clank. Young Zekalov stood rigidly with a defiant air and clenched his hands into fists as he leveled his gaze on his future self. "Well then, I guess I'll be staying a while." The ghost of a smile crossed elder Zekalov's face as his eyes darted behind him to regard the twin swords embedded within the cracked, mossy stone wall of the tomb. "No. You will not. The key is now yours." The elder Kalish pulled the key from out of his tunic pocket and held it out for Zekalov to take. The young warrior was confused. "I don't understand. I didn't kill you, so I failed the test." "No. You passed as I knew you would. There is more to the Force than you can possibly imagine. There is another path. A balance between both light and dark. Your actions are proof of that. One who can master the Force in its entirety is a true force to be reckoned with. Only you, Zekalov, can determine which path you take. Your destiny, you must choose for yourself." To the young warrior's astonishment, the elder Kalish disappeared, leaving no trace that he'd ever been there. The teen retrieved his swords and heard a loud cling sound near his foot. On the floor was the key that had been in the elder Kalish's hand. Zekalov retrieved it and turned to leave and was mildly surprised when the door opened of its own accord, releasing him. "That happens a lot around here," he muttered to himself as he ventured back out into the main passage. Zekalov was no longer afraid. He remembered what the elder Zekalov said concerning prying eyes and that he would discover the answer for himself. Zekalov did about 2 minutes later. He nearly tripped over the object in question. It was a small surveillance drone. It had Dooku's emblem on it. So his master had been spying on him. Why? The teen snarled in anger and hurled it at a nearby wall and watched in satisfaction when it shattered into broken fragments. After making sure it was permanently offline, he hurried to the double doors with both keys in hand. He took a deep breath and let it out. It was time for him to retrieve an artifact. One for himself and the other for Dooku. Zikalov unlocked the doors and pushed them open. Inside, directly ahead, was a sarcophagus. There was an opening in the ceiling right above it that illuminated the room. He cautiously made his way in. He wasn't sure what he was even looking for. How could anything be left to take? Had any grave robbers or other Sith successfully entered this creepy, albeit hallowed ground? The warrior walked up to the sarcophagus and gasped in disbelief. Engraved in the stone was the picture of a Kaleesh Sith Lord. Reza was a Kaleesh Sith. Upon further inspection, the Sith Lord looked incredibly familiar. "You have come at last." Zikalov whirled around when he heard the disembodied voice echo around him and got into another fighting stance. "Who are you? Show yourself." Slowly, a ghostly figure appeared. He appeared as the elder Zikalov he had been fighting mere moments ago. He looked a lot like the image carved in the stone. "Are you Sith Lord Reza?" Zikalov cautiously questioned as he took a hesitant step forward. "That used to be my title. My true name, I fear, has been lost. Not even I can remember it." That was you fighting me back there, wasn't it?" "No. That was a Force mirage. You confronted yourself. Both past, present, and future. Embodied as one. Why do you look so much like me?" Zikalov warily questioned. "I am your great ancestor. My midichlorians were passed down through your mother's bloodline." "Ha! That would explain why my father and the rest of my family aren't Force-sensitive like me." "Indeed. What happened to you?" "In short, I was betrayed and destroyed by a Jedi whom I once considered a brother." Zikalov's eyes widened considerably. "You were friends with a Jedi?" "More than that even. I myself had once been a Jedi, long before I became a Sith Lord." "Why did you turn to the dark side?" "I was seduced by the dark side with the promise of greater power. I came to learn over time that the dark side is equally powerful to the light. My betrayer was sent to bring me before the Jedi Council for trial. I tried to make him see, tried to share with him what I knew. He would not listen. Jedi and Sith are alike in that regard. They are all close-minded. They believe and ally themselves with either the light or the dark and never want to consider that true power resides in both. I became in my final days what was once known as a Grey Jedi. I was not a Jedi nor was I a Sith. I mastered the Force by balancing both light and dark as it was long before the Sith and Jedi ever came to be. Yet I was slain and entombed here. Branded as a Sith Lord in life, and in death. Why did you warn me not to come here? The dark side of the Force strongly permeates this place. It is hard to resist. If one is not careful, they may easily become trapped and never find their way out again." Zikalov raised an eyebridge questionably. "Do you mean that literally or figuratively?" "Both, I'm afraid." The young warrior took another step into the tomb and glanced around now that he felt a little more at ease. The Sith Lord Reza was a Force ghost and couldn't hurt him. Besides, if he was telling the truth, they were related. So far, the ethereal being proved to be benevolent. "How did you know I was coming?" Zikalov frowned at last when he turned his masked head to stare at Reza. "There was a prophecy long ago that foretold the coming of a young Kaleesh warrior to this very tomb. A Kaleesh who was meant to take my place and seize my mantle as Dark Lord." Reza sounded weary and seemed to sag as if he were carrying a heavy burden. "So you believe that prophecy concerns me?" "I believe you are the one. I've waited eons for this day. I am now a relic of the past, young one. It is your choice to see this prophecy through or not. Personally, I would rather you didn't. My advice, don't be hasty. Think this over before you make your final decision. Once you do, there will be no going back. Let's say I did choose to take your place, how would I manage that?" The ghostly figure of Reza waved a hand over his own casket and the grinding of stone could be heard as it slowly opened to reveal a jagged, ebony sword. The blade itself appeared to cast a sporadic, purple, unearthly glow. Almost as if it were alive. "That, young warrior, was mine in life. It was imbued with pure, dark side energy. My own life force was bound to it. Only another Sith, one from my own bloodline, has the potential to wield this weapon. Should you choose to follow the path of the Sith as your master desires, you may take this sword as your own. It will grant you great power and strength. And if I choose not to take it? The ghost smiled softly as he pointed to a stone vault on the opposite side of the room. Inside you will find other relics of my past. A legacy that was never known. Or shared. Those that entombed me here took all of my possessions and buried them here with me without question, never realizing the significance or power that they held. Zekalov crossed the room and pushed the stone back. Inside were items of great interest that were perfectly preserved. A war mask like one he'd never seen. It was ebony and smooth. It was not at all fashioned like a traditional Kalish mask. It looked more like the visored helmet of an ancient soldier. It obscured the entire face and head but allowed room for a Kalish's ears to protrude from the sides. Zekalov picked it up and examined it more closely. Even after wiping away the dust off of the visor, he could still tell it was darkly tinted. Laying beneath it was an armor-plated chest piece. Most likely from the Old Republic. It was ebony like the visor. He could tell it had seen battle if the scratches, dings, and singe marks were anything to go by, as with a pair of black vambraces. Next to it was a lightsaber. He glanced at the ghostly figure of Razor in silent question. The ghostly apparition nodded his head silently in encouragement to the young warrior. Zekalov picked up the lightsaber and nearly held his breath as his finger hovered above the button to activate it. He closed his eyes and held his breath as he turned it on. He opened his eyes and blinked in awe-struck wonder. The saber was not a Sith red as he'd expected. It was a brilliantly, glowing white. Zekalov looked back at the Sith Lord turned grey Jedi and stared at him in shock. How is this possible? I've never seen, let alone even heard that a lightsaber can be this color. What does it mean? That blade embodies the Force in its entirety. Both dark and light. It represents balance. What you see before you was meant to be my true legacy. What will become of me should I choose to take these instead of the dark sword? The transparent form of Razor smiled. That will be entirely up to you. Those items were not forged out of hatred, malice, or darkness. Unlike the dark sword, they will reflect your true nature and enhance your true power, regardless of which path you choose to take. Zekalov looked torn as he stood in silent deliberation. He glanced between the dark sword and the other items of neutral quality. Dooku would murder him if he returned with relics that weren't of a dark side nature. Then again, this was his mission. His master didn't have to know everything. Zekalov would be damned if he gave Dooku the dark sword, but Razor assured him that only one descended from his Kalish bloodline could wield its power. The ghostly apparition noticed his hesitation. You may take them all if you wish. But be warned, the dark sword feeds upon the dark side. Use it for an extended period of time and you, like me, will be bound to its fate. Thank you, Zekalov nodded gratefully. Go now, young warrior. May the Force be with you. The ancient being disappeared completely, leaving Zekalov alone in the silent room. He hastily collected all of the artifacts and stuffed the ebony war helmet, lightsaber, chest armor, and vambraces in his backpack and hefted the dark sword in his hand. He began to run out of the tomb, thankful there were no more obstacles or traps impeding his exit. Once he made it outside, it was nearly dusk. It was not as stifling hot as it had been at the peak hours of the day and had cooled considerably. His keen eyes adjusted to the gathering dark as he ran back to his ship. Once he made it inside, he slumped down in the pilot's chair after securing his newly acquired relics in the cargo hold and removed his traditional war mask. He rested his head back and sighed with relief. His mission was over. It had been a success. He had an artifact to bring to Dooku. It was the first Sith trial out of 3 that he could now scratch off the list. Zekalov hadn't a clue as to what the other 2 were going to entail. For the longest time, The young Kalish warrior could only sit silently and mull over what Razor's ghost had told him. Maybe he was right. Zikalov had once accessed the light side of the Force for however briefly as a child and felt the power and strength that it offered him. What if he managed to successfully wield both? His Sith master would never approve. Nor would Sith Lord Sidious. The son of General Grievous felt it would be wise to keep his encounter with the Force ghost a secret. His comm station beeped an alert, notifying him of an incoming transmission. Without hesitation, Zikalov answered it and saw the tiny figure of his Sith master appear. "Greetings, my young apprentice. I trust you have completed your mission?" "Yes, master. I am about to return to your fortress as you so ordered. There has been a change of plan. You are to return to your father's flagship and await my command." The young Kalish warrior bowed his head in respect. "As you wish, master. The Jedi are hunting you. Keep a low profile and avoid Republic-controlled space. Your father's fleet is currently orbiting the planet Florum." "Yes, master. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to contact me. The general will fill you in on all the details." Zikalov nodded in silent understanding. The communications feed was severed and Zikalov once again found himself brooding. Of course the Jedi were hunting him. He knew they would be as soon as the death of Ahsoka Tano became public. What had him on edge, though, was the fact that his master Dooku was sending him to Florum, a place crawling with low-life scum, pirates, and dirty cutthroats that would jump at the chance to turn him into the Jedi, for a hefty fee of course. The Kalish warrior knew that he would be joining his father's fleet and would thankfully not be landing on the planet below. Would that stop a desperate pirate from attempting to intercept or even board his ship? He had his father's fleet to back him up on that one. The pirates would be foolish to attempt such a scheme. Should there be any sign of a confrontation between himself and a resident of the planet, he had a feeling his father would be sure to blast the scum out of existence. Not that Zikalov couldn't handle himself. Once Zikalov left Korriban's atmosphere and entered orbit, he punched in the correct coordinates and made the jump to light speed. As the stars whizzed by the forward viewport in brilliant white lines, he couldn't help but glance at the glowing dark sword resting in the co-pilot's chair beside him. He didn't have to touch it to feel the dark side energy pulsating from it. The young warrior had been forced into servitude all his life. The mere idea that he now had the freedom to choose his destiny for himself left him feeling elated, yet terrified. Until his unforeseen encounter with the ghost form of Sith Lord Razor, he never believed he had a choice and that his destiny was set in stone. He would be marked a traitor and would have the entire galaxy hunting for him should he forsake the Sith way. Zikalov had no doubt that the Count and his master would order his father to kill him in retaliation for his betrayal. A grey Jedi wielded the dark side in addition to the light. So in a sense, he wouldn't be completely abandoning the Sith. Still, he knew his master would never approve. Hell, he would probably suffer some form of punishment should Dooku ever learn that he'd even considered such a possibility. Zikalov had first-hand experience what become of a Sith apprentice who foolishly used the light side of the Force. No. It was best that Zikalov waited. He would bide his time until the right opportunity presented itself. Until that time, he had priorities to take care of. Namely, constructing his new lightsaber, dealing with Renegade Squad, and finding some way to help his father end the war.